Hey, what's up, Red Letter Disciples? We got another episode today with my man, Pastor Frank Hart. It's going to be an awesome conversation as Frank talks about his SMP experience, and we especially dive into some SMP related things. But before I tell you a little bit more about it and who Frank is, I want to thank today's sponsor, Hodos, H-O-D-O-S. It's a brand new nonprofit designed for 18 to 29-year-olds of the Lutheran Church. We are gearing up for the Lutheran Young Adult Gathering of 2027. And so, hey, if you'd like more information or if you want to get involved in any way, you can go to hodosway.com, Hodos, H-O-D-O-S, way, W-A-Y.com. There we can keep you up to date on the Young Adult Gathering and a live event fundraiser this June 25th, as well as if you are interested in giving and donating towards this amazing cause so that more young adults in our church body can fall in love with Jesus. So thanks to Hodos, and we're excited to see what God is going to do through Hodos. Frank Hart is a pastor at New Church in Katy, Texas. He's been there for 11 years. He has a past in the Assemblies of God and the Reformed Anglican, and fell in love with Lutheran theology, working at a Lutheran church in Katy, Texas, in music, and then planted a church and went through SMP. And I love his story, and I want to showcase his story because these are the stories that come with SMP. And so my point in having these conversations is to further push against restrictions and any sort of bottlenecking or limiting of this program. We need to open it up because we get more stories like Frank's. You're going to love hearing his story. We also talk a lot about something that should change in the SMP program, at least according to Frank, and I agree. And it is the unending provisional status. We need to take a look at what that looks like and how to take that provisional status away from faithful pastors who have served in our church body. And we also talk a little bit about some of the frustrating things that other pastors can talk and say about SMP pastors, that they're second tier, that they didn't sacrifice. How does that feel? So anyway, we go on that journey. I hope you enjoyed today's conversation, and it brings a little bit more light to help us understand one another a little bit better as we continue to talk pastoral formation and how to be healthy and how to trust one another in the LCMS. Hey, if you haven't already, rate, review, subscribe, follow, share, like, do all the things, comment, all of it. All of that helps me to know that we're on the right track so we can produce more episodes like this in the future. But without further ado, let's get to today's episode with Frank Hart. Let's do this. I have the incredible Pastor Frank Hart on with us today. Frank is serving as a pastor in the LCMS. He's an SMP pastor, and we want to talk about that. And so, Frank, where are you serving these days?
So we're in Katy, Texas, which is a little suburb on the west side of Houston, about 400,000 people, just a little village, really.
Very cool. And how many years have you been at Katy, in Katy, Texas?
So I've been in Katy since, I live in Houston, just on the other side of the boundary line, but I've been in this area since 1987. So that's a long time. I've been doing ministry in Katy since 2004. So I've been in Katy doing ministry with the LCMS for a long time now.
We'll talk about your path and kind of rolling through SMP, and especially want to get into your story and kind of how you are seen and perceived in LCMS circles, and talk about some things that I hope would elevate those who have gone through SMP. But prior to even getting into SMP, have you had a full-on Lutheran LCMS background, or talk to me about your kind of journey, if you will, regarding the LCMS?
Well, I'm kind of a latecomer to the LCMS, but I wasn't raised in the church. I came to faith at 14, which is a story into itself. But when I came to faith in Jesus, I wanted everyone to know what I knew. I mean, I immediately started talking to my friends and my family, and I got them all coming to church with me. And there was this really cool Assembly of God church in our little town in Pawnee, Illinois. Anyway, I knew right away that I wanted to devote my life to making disciples for Jesus, to sharing the gospel with people. And so right out of high school, I went to a Bible college with the Assembly of God. And then right away, I kind of knew that I wasn't going to be an Assembly of God pastor, mostly just through their, I'd read the Bible a couple times by that point, and their systematic theology, the more Pentecostal charismatic way of looking things, that wasn't what I had gathered in a plain reading of Scripture. They did a great service introducing me to Jesus and teaching me the Bible, and I'm very thankful to God for everything that the Assembly of God brought into my life, my family's life. All of that was great, but I was not going to be an Assembly of God pastor. Finished the degree, but while I was there, I started having success with music and writing songs, playing with my band. And so I did music for the next 20 years. And so that's, and even there, I still consider that to be ministry.
Yeah.
All of my songs were just my musings on Christian theology and conversations that I wanted to have with people, even people that I didn't know. And so we were playing all of these places, and we were touring with, Ronnie James Dio, and playing all these metal clubs, and just having a great time with that, meeting a lot of people and sharing the gospel every chance I got with people there. Became part of a Reformed Anglican church while I was doing all of that in Houston. And still have lots of friends from that church. But I was hired to be the music director at Crosspoint Community Church in Katy in 2004. While I left the Reformed Anglican Church to go and do that in Katy. I was there for 11 years as the music director and creative director, and as an elder in the church, and preached sometimes and taught Bible classes, and just did all kinds of ministry as part of that church. Really got to love LCMS Lutheran doctrine. Really came to love that. In particular, like, what really grabbed me was a couple things. The hidden God. That we don't have to explain everything, that there can be room for mystery. Our Reformed brothers, they like to squeeze that out just a little bit, so a little more room for mystery is nice. And also, the proclamation of the gospel. I told you, I wanted everybody to know what I knew and to have what I had in my faith in Jesus. And I'd heard a lot of people talk about Jesus, talk about the gospel, try to convince people to believe. But it wasn't until I was part of a Lutheran expression of ministry that I heard that proclamation, the for you language, the actual, like, just punching them in the face with the glory of the gospel, and not trying to convince them, just applying it. And I didn't even know what was going on at first. At first, I'm like, you're talking to the whole congregation as though they're saved. You're talking to them all like they already know Jesus. You're telling them that they have this promise, but you haven't convinced them yet. They haven't. There's no altar calls. What's going on? I mean, we didn't have altar calls in the Reformed Anglican. Well, we did. We had an altar call. It was called communion. That's still the altar call that we have. Anyway, so I loved those aspects, especially of LCMS doctrine. And so then, after about 11 years, I left Crosspoint, and some people had asked me if I'd be interested in planting a new church. And I wasn't really interested at first, but, praying and wrestling and conversations. And so, if I'm going to do this, though, I want to do it as an LCMS church, and I'm not an LCMS pastor. So that means I need seminary. I need to be ordained. I need to be rightly called. All of these things need to happen. And so that's when I was introduced to the idea of the SMP program by John Bronnerswerther and the Texas District, and the people that had already green-lighted me to plant a church. So here we go, SMP program.
Here we go. What year did that start?
So that was the spring of 2016. So about a year after I planted the church. And
I think that's one of the strategic uses of SMP that, I I think is really important. I think obviously as we look into our current LCMS churches and the realities, I am fully for, LCMS kids growing up and being identified and being encouraged, to grow up in the system and to become pastors. But I'm also like, yeah, we have great theology, and some people that come from other church bodies do find us through different ways. And sometimes it is by hiring, through a music ministry, and you fall in to LCMS and LCMS theology, and it's what you love. And so part of I think our strategy ought to be twofold too, is absolutely how do we work with who we already have and kids that are growing up in our churches, but also how do we strategically bring those that aren't a part of our fold, but give them a easier path, give them a more strategic path so that we can kind of tackle this pastoral crisis from several angles. And so I think that's really neat. So 11 years in at then Katy and all of this. Now you're going through the SMP program. One of the words that gets tossed out a lot that I can't stand, so I just love to hear kind of your perspective on it, is this comparison of sacrifice, that for those that do the residential route, that we are the ones that sacrificed because we moved our families, some 2, 3, 4 times in order to go to residential seminary. And almost it's like, if we've done that, we feel like that should be our, that we did that once, and so what, we don't need to sacrifice anymore. But then on the flip side, that those who are through SMP, that some of the chatter at least is that they haven't sacrificed, and that's not a worthy sacrifice. And so I just think that's totally ridiculous. But I'd love to kind of hear from your perspective, what sacrifices did you or your family make for the SMP program to be a reality?
Well, let's look at that. So I was planting a church. Planting a church, some people say planting a church is a young man's game. Okay, I wasn't a young man, but I'm planting a church. So that's the jobs that I had at Crosspoint. I already listed those. I'm still doing those jobs in the church plant. Now I'm also the pastor. So I'm planting a church. That's a full-time job. Okay, there's a lot that goes into that. So now, and a lot of these guys, they have a second job too. But I'm going to tell my story because I don't know their story. I know my story. So SMP's on top of all that. So on top of doing full-time ministry and all of the various things that go along with that, and in my case, not an established ministry, but a ministry that I'm kind of making up as I go along, church planting. So the SMP program is reading 2 or 3 books a week. It's having a 3-hour class once a week. It's trips to St. Louis or Fort Wayne twice a year for
week long.
Yeah, for you're in class all week long, all day long. Plus, there's the financial cost. My son is right now in the residential program, so I know that his tuition is covered. He has to cover his room and board, but he doesn't have to come up with $10,000 a year. SMP is expensive, and there's not tuition assistance for SMP. Plus, I had 2 kids in high school at home. I'm married. My parents live with me. So, making time for full-time pastoral ministry and all of the things that go along with church planting, being a father and a husband, and doing the SMP on top of all of that. Yeah, I don't know. Yes, there's a lot of sacrifice. It's a lot.
Yeah. Have you heard others use that language though, of that kind of comparison, and that it's not the sacrifice, or have you heard much of that?
So I have heard people talk about that. It sounds like, I want to be gracious on your program, Zach. You're a very gracious host, and I think you do a great job. So I do not want to come off as, like I'm bitter and I'm like,
and I don't want you to either, but I also part of this is shedding light on realities, and some of the realities that I'm hearing about is frustration from those who've gone through the SMP program of several aspects of going through it, and sort of these unfair shots or unfair critiques that aren't helpful. They're only harmful. And so no, I don't want you to be naturally more bitter than you might be, or I'm not looking for a guest to come on to give me sound bites that are extreme and fear mongering, but I'm also like, tell your story, and if it's what happened to you, like, let's share that, and let's hear what it's like to be in your shoes, so we can all get better, so that the next round of SMP candidates don't have to go through what some of y'all have had to go through, if that makes sense.
Sure. And I'm not bitter at all. I've just noticed that some of the guys who, they're old school and like, that's the way they did it. And by gum, that's the way everyone's got to do it. And they make it sound like that was such a horrible sacrifice. But, everybody has their sacrifice. Everybody has their cross to carry. You can't compare. We're not supposed to compare. So I'm not going to compare. But, it's kind of like, I told you I did music for a long time, and I suppose that there are people that think, how dare some whippersnapper get a record and a publishing deal, and they didn't study music theory, and they didn't study classical music, and they didn't go to Berkeley. I mean, perhaps they did all of those things, and now they're a music teacher and they're barely scraping by, and this kid, what did he do? He just like bought a guitar at a pawn shop and wrote some silly little song, and then they gave him hundreds of thousands of dollars. Like, that's not the way it's done. Or I do remember people talking when I was first getting into the music industry, like American Idol was just starting to happen. And man, so many of the record executives were so bitter about that. It's like, that's not how it's done. They didn't pay their dues. They didn't suffer. They didn't do the hard road of hard knocks to get there. And look at them on TV under the lights getting accolades. That's not how we do it. That's not fair. It's the same. Everybody thinks the way they did it is the way it ought to be done. And by the way, at the end of this conversation, I'll bet you that's the impression that I give. The SMP program, that's the way it ought to be done. That's the best way. It's the right way. Everyone should do it that way. It's better. I will say that. I do believe that.
Yeah. And I think it is, from the survey that I put out by 1,054 Lutheran leaders, it is not seen as inferior. It is seen as being more confident in a lot of the churches that and the leaders that said that. And so let's press into it a little bit. And by the way, all programs I think can be improved. So it's not a perfect program, but it's what you went through and it's what you think is better or best. And so for someone unfamiliar with it, how would you describe what SMP is designed to do, or what kind of pastor is it trying to form, and why would it be kind of the preferred model or method, if you will?
So you and I were both at the Koinonia gathering in Las Vegas, and one of the presenters got up, and the first thing he said was this analogy, this metaphor. And this was basically his analogy, his metaphor. He was opposed to online learning, and he started with this. He said, would you take your car to a mechanic who had only studied online and had never actually worked on a physical car? Would you trust him with your vehicle? Okay, and then he went on with his talk. And I remember thinking, you've got your analogy upside down, because here's the SMP program in your analogy. A guy has been working at a garage, an auto mechanic garage. He's been working there for many years. He's worked on every kind of car you've ever seen, but he's not certified in, car computers or something. So he takes an online course on Tuesday nights where he spends 3 hours. He has to read books. Maybe he learns how to read Volkswagen auto manuals in the original German. I don't know, but he learns about the history of the automobile, So, but all the while, while he's taking these online courses to get certified, he's working on cars every day. He's got grease under his fingernails. He is absolutely the guy you would trust to work on your car. And I love my son. I love my son, and he's going to be an amazing pastor. But after 2 years, and then a vicarage, and then a 4th year, his first day on the job as a pastor is going to be his first day on the job as a pastor.
Yeah. Yeah, because even in SMP, you don't necessarily have the title of pastor when you start the program, but you are performing and acting like the pastor because you are in many cases that doing that. So what ways did the program stretch you, Frank?
Stretch me. So probably time management. That was probably the number one way that it stretched me, because you're adding all of those other things to a very full life already. But even there, I remember, did you ever have Andy Bartelt?
I never had him for a class, but I know him, and he's a great guy.
Yeah, he is a great guy, but he was sort of leading the SMP program when I first started it.
Mm-hmm.
And I was talking with him on one of the times that I was in St. Louis before one of our general sessions where he was going to present and talk to all the cohorts. And we were talking about how some guys find the SMP program, to be really hard, really difficult, really challenging. And I just sort of sarcastically, jokingly said, oh yeah, it's just awful. Like right now, what I have to do is I have to sit down in a comfortable chair and read a really great book. And that's the most important thing on my list of things to do right now. That's what God wants me to do. Sit here and read a great book. And then, oh no, I have to discuss that book with some of the smartest people on the planet when I'm done. Man, that's just... I love the program. I thought it was great. So having to read a book or two, I've always read a book or two every week, but I did that for fun, and I had to squeeze it in around all my other responsibilities. But now, that's what I have to do. That is the responsibility. So you do that, and, other than the time crunch, I thought it was a joy. It was just amazing.
Yeah, some critics, say that in comparison to the residential program, that SMP pastors aren't as thoroughly prepared. They tout that it's a total of 16 classes, and maybe somewhere close to 40% of the coursework, if you will, from a residential degree. And, a good chunk of that 60% that's not there is that Greek and Hebrew are not a part of SMP program. So are SMP graduates not as thoroughly prepared, or is there something we're misunderstanding about the formation process itself?
First of all, I would just remind us of our confessions and the teachings of Walther, like Greek and Hebrew, an MDiv. They don't mention those things as, at least in my understanding, a man who does word and sacrament ministry, they call him a pastor. And so, is it good to learn Greek and Hebrew? Yeah, I'm sure it is. I'm sure that would be great. Does every local congregation need a guy who can parse the verbs and translate Job? I'm not sure that every local congregation needs that. I think that some do, and I think that I don't want to lose our ability to read languages. Of course not. But that's kind of a secondary issue. One of the things that the SMP program does is it calls men who are in a context already, who are already doing ministry, and that's a great strength. That is, it also seems to be Book of Acts, epistles. It seems to be the way that our scriptures tell us we should be forming pastors.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah, I want to dive into a little bit more of kind of thoughts and feelings of what it's like to be an SMP pastor in our denomination. But I first would love for you to just kind of share the story of where you're serving now, the church, what's happened over the years, and give us a little bit of a framework into what it's like to be a pastor at the church you're planting. It's New Life, is that correct?
No, it's called New Church.
New Church. Oh, my bad.
Church.
So yeah, New Church. There you go.
So in 2015, 11 years ago, we just had our 11th birthday. We were talking about planting this church, and we kept calling, so we're planting this new church. We didn't have a name yet. My good friend, Pastor Aaron Lytle, he's at a church called Oikos, which means, house or
Household.
family.
Yeah.
And so I thought, well, maybe a Greek word would be cool. So church, ecclesia. Let's go with ecclesia. But there's already an ecclesia in Houston that's, pretty big church. And so I thought maybe Franklesia. No, that's absurd. No, we're not going to call it that. But we kept calling it this New Church. And eventually we just said, let's just call it New Church. We'll close the words, capitalize the C, New Church. Every generation is a new church. We have to reach this generation to be a new church in the kingdom of God. So we're not the newest church. That's not what it means, because people have asked me that before. What are you going to do when new church isn't new anymore? It's like, well, the whole point is to reach the new church in every generation, pass the baton, man. That's what we're doing here. So that will never happen. The church dies if we don't become the new church. So anyway, we're a church that we've been portable. Right now, we're very blessed to be in a theater of a Christian K through 12 school. They have a couple of theaters, and they let us keep all of our stuff and remodel and just be in one of them. So that is really awesome, really great. And we are a modern expression liturgically of an LCMS church. So we do have, I believe we have all of the liturgical elements, but we don't follow them verbatim out of the Lutheran service book. But we have all of the elements. We do hymns, songs, and spiritual songs. Like we do the new stuff, we do the old stuff, we do stuff that we write. Because, I'm not the only songwriter in our church. My good friend Kemper Crabb, who he's part of the Jesus music revolution from the 60s and 70s. He's part of our congregation, so he helps me lead worship, and we've got a couple other songwriters in there, so we do our stuff. C.S. Lewis said that for every new book, you should read an old book because they don't have the same blind spots. And he said books from the future would be just as good, but they're hard to find. So we apply that to that's funny, but
that's cool.
But
yeah.
So we kind of apply that to our music. We do songs that the Holy Spirit is doing all over the world. We do songs that the church has been doing for hundreds of years, the hymns. And then we do songs from the future, but they're really just songs that we wrote that nobody else knows. And that's what we're doing. We reach a different, I don't think I have more than a couple people in my church that started off Lutheran. So we're reaching people that they'd either fallen away from the church on one way or the other, or had never been part of a church. So we're doing what 14-year-old Frank always wanted to do.
That's pretty sweet to hear that kind of full circle of the 14-year-old version of you that's just getting to tell Jesus, to as many people as you can. And in mad respect for me, man, I've been a church planter, and I know the portable world, the setup takedown, and so it is. There's blessings with it, but it's a grind, and I have mad respect for anybody that's been doing that for a long time, because that takes a certain level of leadership development and volunteer recruitment and appreciation and development that the normal church that is fortunate enough to have a building and a space doesn't have to do. And so that's pretty sweet, man. And so 11 years into it, what are a couple of the things that you would say you're most proud of with what's been going on at New Church?
I mean, when I sit in my discipleship groups and I have them tell their story about how they came to faith in Jesus, how they actually came to know that Jesus is for them, and they point to the ministry that we do together at New Church, that's the greatest thing on earth. There's nothing greater than that.
That's
when
cool.
They can point at other people in the room and say, man, you're the reason that I have faith in Jesus. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah. And part of the reason I love hearing your story and sharing about what's going on at New Church, and am an advocate for the SMP, not restricting it, but actually opening it up even more, is because I think that there are more stories like yours. And if we just send everybody away, there perhaps would not be a church in Katy, Texas called New Church right now, at least not led by Frank Hart, and at least not having an 11-year history.
No, we wouldn't exist. Without the SMP program, we wouldn't exist. When I first heard about those restrictions, none of the restrictions really apply to me, except I don't hear, when the resolution first came through in 2007, my understanding is that it was for three specific purposes. It was for the small churches that can't afford a pastor, check. It was for larger churches that need a pastor for specific or for other roles in the church because they've outgrown one guy. Okay, that makes perfect sense. But then also the third, which is the one that I utilized, is church planters. So I don't hear a lot of people talk, even in the restrictions, I don't hear them talking about the church planter aspect of it. But if they're not going to embrace that, now I did watch Mark Thompson on your program, and he kind of clarified that, well, no, those guys will still get in the program. They just might have to wait until the next cohort. Okay, great, awesome. I'm happy with that. That's a good answer. So, yeah, but New Church wouldn't exist without the opportunity of the SMP program to raise up a local guy who can't go do a residential. My parents had just moved in with me. What am I going to do?
Right.
That's not going to happen.
Yeah. And church plants oftentimes don't, they're not like these really nicely well thought out, planned out things that you go to seminary and then you go, you plant a church. They typically happen when life happens, and you start a small group that becomes a Bible study, that becomes something bigger. And all of a sudden, wait, are we a church? Should we be a church? And to have a program that can come alongside of that and support it, I think is vital. And yeah, great if they get in the next cohort, but also what about opening up our cohorts so that we don't have to have a waiting list? Let's keep moving on that. And so again, it's part of why I wanted to share your story, is because behind every SMP pastor, there's a story, there's a church, there's people involved, there's ministries that are starting. And if and when we bottleneck this or we restrict, we're gonna hear less stories of God doing incredible things. And so, and not only that, but then again, we talked a little bit about the sacrifice thing earlier, but it's just there's this weird sort of perception out there, and many times I know that some of my own brothers have labeled the residential as the gold standard, and those are the gold standard pastors, and that SMP, that you're somewhat second tier. And so what does that look like for you in real life to kind of hear that or to be perceived in that way?
Oh, yes, the second mezzanine pastor program, the SMP.
How is that what it stands for?
Yeah, that's what it stands for. I mean, I hear usually the grumpy old dudes again. Love them. They're doing their thing, man. I don't want to sound bitter, okay? Please. But I hear them saying, you don't understand. It's a specific ministry pastor program. And these guys, they abuse the program because the mega churches, they're just using it to get a quick, cheap pastor. Well, I don't know what's cheap about it, and I don't know what's quick about it. So Come on. It's like they're saying SMP guys should just stay in their very narrow lane. They should do that 4-year program, at the cost of over $40,000. And then at the end of it, they should do whatever their very narrow, tiny little sliver of ministry that they started the program doing when they were untrained and unordained. And I mean, the logic is not making any sense to me at all. So now they've taken all of this theological and biblical training and practical pastoral training. And so they're doing this ministry, and the ministry grows, the ministry changes, but they're supposed to stay in that tiny little sliver. They're not supposed to be able to grow in their, what ministry of what they're doing. They're not supposed to be able to take a call somewhere. Life changes. Are you going to tell me that, like, residential guys move around 3 or 4 times in their career, usually in their ministry, right? Well, it's going to be the same with an SMP guy. He's not just going to stay at that church. He's going to grow. God is going to move him somewhere else. The book of Acts, they're always moving around. This is what's going to happen. So it's like, stay in your lane, and the program was designed to keep you in your place. And come on, man, that's not how ministry works. That's not how God works. And as you grow in your knowledge, in your faith, in your ministry, things are going to change, and God is going to give you new adventures, new challenges, new sacrifices. You're going to move forward. So don't try to stifle what the Spirit's doing in these men's lives. Come on.
Yeah. Have you felt that in your kind of with what others have been voicing or saying about your role? Is that
I hear them saying it about the program.
Yeah.
I have not had that problem. I'm in Texas. Texas is awesome. They're so supportive. I mean, truly, the Texas district is so incredibly supportive about all of this. So, I don't. That's not particularly here, but I do hear people talk about it, and especially in the context since this conversation has really been coming to a boil since the new restrictions, and there just seems to be this pressure for uniformity that's happening in the LCMS, just so stifling and so counter to growth. I know, I hear you talk about this.
Yeah. Yeah, it feels like we're pushing even more towards controlling everything, and this is another measure to control. And I see that even in SMP is like, we want control over these guys, and when someone has senses or a church needs a new pastor that is an SMP, all of a sudden they're labeled abusers of the program, and it's like that doesn't sound right. We're trying to do the best ministry that we can in all of our settings. And so, yeah, let's keep talking through that, because there are limitations, right, on SMP. So there's a kind of a known, like, that's your specific, but there's also like long-term limitations on SMP pastors. Is that not correct?
Yeah. So there's like this provisional status to SMP pastors. They get their certification, they get ordained, but there's limitations to what they can do as a pastor. And some of those limitations are that you can't bring other called workers in and you oversee them. Like, as my understanding is, I'm not supposed to be able to do that. Well, in a growing church, if God blesses your church and it's growing, eventually you're going to need more than just you doing that church. So I'm not sure what the future, what were they thinking? Like, how was that supposed to size with a growing ministry? If I can't bring in another pastor, a DCE, if I can't bring in people that then what am I supposed to do? I don't see how that works. I can't represent what's called the ministerium. So when it comes to like going to convention next summer, I can't go as the pastoral representative. I can't be a circuit visitor. My circuit visitor would probably love it if I could, because, that's a sort of a thankless job. I'd be happy to take my turn, but I'm not allowed to, so I get a pass on that one. Let's see, what are the other restrictions? I just believe that the provisional status should be lifted at some point. 3-4 years, an SMP guy in good standing, he should just be considered just a full rostered general pastor. I don't see why that, according to our confessions, I don't see why that couldn't be the case.
So, I don't either, by the way. I agree with you. I think that if you put in enough time and prove, you're that this is the career for you, and that God, the calling for you, and that God's doing great things, that seems backwards, that there would be sort of this unending provisional status. And so, according to like what you're saying, correct me if I'm wrong, so you actually can't vote as a pastoral delegate, is that right? So does New Church have how do you guys vote for the president and some of the overtures and things that are coming up?
Yeah, I believe I get a vote as the pastor of New Church, but I can't be the representative to vote on the other things.
Okay.
I'm not an expert in these things.
Yeah.
But,
yeah. But this is that's a big one. You can't oversee a called worker. So that again is I don't think we think about growth. If your church is growing, then that's a beautiful thing. There will need to be other called workers. And so what would happen? Let's just say you need a DCE. Does that person get oversight from somebody that's not in your church? Is that the way that would happen technically? Or I guess if we're playing by the rules?
Yeah, I think that I would have to have one of my real pastor buddies come in and do the call from their church, something like that. The other thing is I can't send a guy through the SMP program as their mentor. That's another thing I can't do. I'm like a mule. I can't reproduce.
But that's a huge problem, right? So you can't oversee called workers. You can't.
Hey, if I'm wrong about this, I'd be happy to be wrong. So all of these things are said open-handedly, and this is out there in the universe for the conversation. So be glad to be wrong about that.
You can't send a guy to mentor. So how are you going to raise up? What's the succession plan? There's nothing there. And then, correct me if I'm wrong, but it's also you are still, even after SMP, do you still have a mentor or supervisor that you're supposed to be in relationship with or checking in with for the duration of time? Yes. Is that correct?
Some people have said that it's not specific ministry pastor, it's supervised ministry pastor. I've heard that too.
So we got specific mezzanine, a second mezzanine.
Second mezzanine is the right one. That's the right one. So you and I, again, that Koinonia gathering, when Bob Sundquist, when he got up and he went through all of the resolutions and the overtures that had been done at convention concerning pastoral formation, and he talked about all the different times, I thought it was amazing. I did not think that his talk was going to be interesting and amazing when I was told what the subject was going to be, but it was. It was so good. Because
Bob went through all the resolutions, I think, of all the conventions, which that's why it sounds boring.
I know, it sounds boring.
Right.
And it took him
to figure out pastoral formation history. And so go ahead.
I believe it took him 19 hours to actually go through those. If I remember, 19, 20 hours, something like that. We were there. No, it was but it was a lengthy presentation, and he was very engaging. But it showed our struggle as the LCMS, our struggle between those two things, what he called a practical formation for pastors, because we need pastors. So Springfield was a seminary for that, and I don't really know the history, but so a practical, which is like the SMP program, versus a theoretical or an intellectual, And every time there would be so many practical pastors that would be made that they'd get nervous and they'd pull back so that they would only have the ivory tower pastors.
Yeah.
It's
I think
like
you called those theoretical, right? Practical and
theoretical.
theoretical, I think
What did I
was two
call it?
words.
Did I have a
Ivory
different word?
tower.
I did, but before that, I think I called it theoretical. But I might have called it something
Perfect.
else.
Yep.
I might have.
Perfect.
But yes, but yeah, we've had a tension with this always. We've always had this tension between like what does a pastor need to know, and anyway, I thought that was really good. We in our history we keep doing that.
Yeah, I was greatly impressed with our history of being flexible when it comes to pastoral formation, and it made me feel better about myself and speaking up about this, because actually the posture that myself and Tim Allman and others that are taking and voicing is far more synodical than current, where we're not open to having these conversations and trying to figure out how do we produce more practical pastors, and so it made me actually feel a little better about myself. And anytime I can feel better about myself, that's really good, Frank.
That's good. That's good. At the risk of not seeming very charitable, and I really don't want to come off that way, but it seems like there are some in our church body who are more concerned with holding on to liturgical traditions, historical identity, than the church's mission of reaching the lost and making sure that our churches are doing ministry in all the different contexts. It seems like they're more concerned with making a specific kind of pastor, not specific, get rid of the word specific because that's confusing, a certain kind of pastor, as opposed to let's get all kinds of pastors, like all kinds of pastors, not just Timothy's, but also Titus's and Apostle Paul's. And I didn't exactly come from LCMS pastor central casting, which means that I reach different people. I think a lot of people would like to have a pastor that's more like Mr. Rogers. Mr. Rogers is great, but I can't be Mr. Rogers. I'm not Mr. Rogers. So, maybe we need some guys that are slightly different temperaments and bring different things to the pastoral ministry, to the table, different skill sets, different personalities, some that are more aggressive, some that are less aggressive. Hey, it's going to take all kinds to reach all the different people. It is.
Amen. Amen. And all different types of churches as well, different types of pastors, different types of churches. And I think that, some people, when they hear me talk like this, they say, oh, there he said the quiet part out loud. But I actually just voice what was said in that survey, that there is not a lot of confidence in our current residential programs to produce pastors that our churches actually need. And underneath that, what they're saying, and this was voiced a lot at the Koinonia, so again, call me out for saying it, but I'm just saying what I'm hearing and what others are saying, is that our residential programs are producing a certain type, certain kind of pastor that, again, feels very controlled. And when we're struggling and when the church body's on decline, there's a number of people that want to bring back control, and that's the answer. And I'm saying that's not the answer. We've got to open this thing up and allow God's Spirit to do great things. Of course, we need parameters, and of course, I'm not saying completely go rogue on all of this. Let's have more healthy, robust conversations about how to use the current system and structures and people and seminaries, but in ways that are actually moving our church forward, rather than controlling, producing one type of pastor and then telling the rest of us we don't fit and we just need to kind of get in line. And that's the challenge I think that we're facing right now, is there's just some really strong opinions that I would say the majority of people voice, but the majority of those opinions are not the ones in power that are making decisions. And it's really frustrating to be in a system where you are in the majority thinking-wise, but practice-wise, they're not allowing or not willing to engage in these conversations. And so, again, I'm not against multiple pathways. I think that we need multiple pathways. I mentioned earlier, I think, let's continue to talk about who's already in our churches, but Frank's a beautiful example of someone that came from outside of our system, that let's find a way to get those people outside of our system so that they can be a part of it. It's a beautiful thing, and look at the fruits of your ministry that's come from it. Anything else on the SMP side of it? If there was something you could change about how SMP pastors are perceived or treated, is that kind of what you were talking about? Let's remove the provisional, or can we remove the provisional status and what that would look like? Is that kind of the big thing? What's your idea on that?
Let's see. I have some notes on that, but
perfect.
Yeah, I mean, for sure that. I already talked about how I think that the provisional thing should be lifted. And so as I'm, within, 7 to 10 years of retirement, I'm starting to look at how can I do a responsible handing of this ministry over to someone else. So, so one of the things that I looked into is what's it called? The GPC, the General Pastoral.
The General Pastoral Certificate.
So one of the things that I looked into was that, so that I could, just do another 3 years online, just like the SMP program, another sacrifice. But I'm willing to do that if it'll work. But there's some significant roadblocks to doing that. For one, even with tuition assistance, it's still over $20,000 to do that. Without tuition assistance, it'd be over 40.
Yeah. And current SMP, you're throwing out 40,000. It's closer to 50,000, and that doesn't even count some of the travel expenses too on the student. But keep going.
Right. So super expensive. My church can't afford that. I wouldn't even ask them to. Okay.
Right.
Then secondly, in order to get into the GPC program, I have to pass the Greek qualifier. Okay, so when am I going to do that? I'm not a residential guy who's going to go take summer Greek. I'm not, like my son, I didn't go to a Concordia college and just take Greek and Hebrew as I went. Didn't do that. So here I am, pastoring a church, and I'm supposed to somehow come up with a way to qualify in Greek. I believe that there is a 1-year program online that I could do that. So now we have to add another year, another cost to that. That's daunting, man. It's daunting. And at the end of all of that, now I am a general pastor, but it is still not a master's degree.
Right.
That's crazy. That's crazy.
That's a lot of time investment and financial investment in not having a master's of divinity.
That's something. I was told that if I wanted to, though, at the end of my general certification, I could take a test that they have designed that would basically qualify me for a master's degree. So
I haven't heard that.
That doesn't sound daunting at all, does it? A bunch of guys.
I'm sure with how easy they make everything else that it'd be pretty easy. Yeah,
I'm sure that it just wouldn't be. Dude, that's at that point they should just give you a PhD, because that's what you're doing. When you have to take that kind of test at the end of an education program, that's not a master's level coursework. That's doctoral level coursework.
What do we do? What from your perspective, like how can we be more unified regarding all of this? There's lots of opinions. You've got opinions. I've got opinions. How do we stay more unified on all this? What can we do?
I mean, trust has to go both ways. If trust was the big problem, that we all kept hearing in Las Vegas at the Koinonia gathering. Trust is the big problem. You got the guys up there that were more traditional in their understanding, and they're like, just trust us. Bring it to us. Just trust that you'll get a fair hearing. And we're like, yeah, we don't trust that. And I don't see. I mean, if somebody doesn't believe that you're for them, you're not going to trust them. If you don't believe that they are trying to help you and they're for you, that they're kind of against you, I mean, no. So yeah, trust has to go both ways. You can't just ask you and me to just start trusting the man and the system when, from our perspective, everything they're doing is trying to slow down what we believe God is calling us to do. So that's a little frustrating. It's pretty hard. But I think that, I mean, I've heard you talk a lot. I think you're perfectly charitable when it comes to the authorities that are over you. You're just wanting, you want our church body to survive and to move into the future and to reach this next generation and not age out with our current congregations. Dude, me too. You know, I wish I was your age and able to shoulder the fight with you more, but I'll keep going as long as I can.
I'm getting old, Frank. I'm getting old.
Huh.
I appreciate you, Frank, and I've loved getting to know you a little bit more in Vegas and through this conversation, and seeing some of your stuff online. It's really refreshing and really awesome to see that you are in it, that you've been in it, and that you want the best for our church body as well. But at the same time, like, you're going to keep doing New Church, and God's doing a great thing, and I'm super proud of you for 11 years of church planting, and like I said, doing the portable thing up and down every week is a grind that those that don't do it don't understand. And hey, you want to start throwing the word sacrifice? If we're going to start comparing sacrifice around, that's a sacrifice right there. And so appreciate you doing that. Well, Frank, I ask this question of all my guests to kind of on the way out, but if you could challenge our listeners to do one thing to be a greater disciple of Jesus, what would you challenge them to do?
So I know you always ask this question at the end. So I always think this. I always think, what do people mean by discipleship? Because there's kind of three ways to look at discipleship. You can fill their head with knowledge, so like an intellectual approach to making disciples. You can try to get them all excited about following Jesus, sort of an emotional appeal to being more on fire for God. Let's go, come on, run towards Jesus. Or you can be more of a, let's act like Jesus. Let's obey his commands. Let's put more of a moral structure, more discipline on ourselves. So LCMS is pretty good at the first one. We hint a lot at the third one, but we don't want to take that too far because that looks like works righteousness, so we take it too far. We're not so good at the second one because people who try too hard, we're very suspicious of that. People who have very much enthusiasm, there's that word. Oh man, we don't want to be an enthusiast. But discipleship is going to involve all three of those things. And our understanding of discipleship is going to involve all three, which means it's going to be messy. Because in some ways, those three things don't mix. And they're always going to kind of push in one direction or another. You're going to spend some evenings. We have discipleship groups at New Church. It's been part of what we do from the beginning. And there are going to be some evenings that are more intellectual. And there are going to be some evenings where there are more tears and we're getting into the hurts and the pains of life. And there's going to be some weeks that are more, sort of encouraging and exhorting. And there's going to be some weeks, my discipleship group is called Straight to Awkward. That's what it's called. Straight to Awkward Discipleship Company. So you kind of know when you show up what you're in for. So yeah, we're going to talk about what's going on in our lives, and sometimes they're going to bring up things that, brother, that's not something you should be doing or saying or embracing. You are off the path there, my friend. So
there you go. So the challenge is just be awkward, or what?
Straight to awkward. It's something my brother says. My brother comes up with a lot of pithy sayings, but yeah, he spent his career as a cop, and so he goes, all right. It kind of means cut to the chase. It's like, okay, Zach, I'm going to go straight to awkward. I'm not digging that shirt. Straight to awkward. Oh. No, I like your shirt fine, but I had to say something. So,
okay. I was like, man, I kind of like this shirt.
I do like that shirt.
Whatever,
it's
Frank.
fine.
Whatever, Frank.
Yeah.
I appreciate that. I think that's a good way to look at it too. And I do we're more on the intellectual side. We struggle with the works righteousness aspect, the sanctification piece, which is, that third thing. But that second one is really important to me. That passion, that inspiration, that emotion. We just kind of like to keep it bottled up, and there's I think we got to work through that. And if you know who God is, like, you should have passion, you should have emotion, you should have inspiration, but how to do that in a way that honors and is great conversations to have. So, Frank, if people want to connect with you, man, where can they find you these days? How can they connect with you?
Email frank@frankhart.com. Website frankhart.com.
Nice.
It's not updated very often, but it would get you to the one that is, which is newchurch.love.
Okay.
Did you know you could do .love?
I did not.
Yeah, .love.
Finding that out right now.
Newchurch.love is anyway, that's the most up-to-date thing, because church happens every week. And I'm on Facebook and Twitter and all the places, so I'm easy to find.
Yeah, there you go. Well, I really appreciate you, and I honor you, and I thank you that you are a fellow brother pastor that is not second tier, but super thankful for the sacrifices that you've made and that you're still making, and love cheering you on and seeing what God's doing at New Church. And so thank you, man, for sharing your story and for helping us press in a little bit more on how we can treat some of our own, even in greater ways. I think it's really eye-opening in a lot of ways. So appreciate you, brother. Take care.
Thank you. Thanks for having me on. By the way, I know you were winding down just then, but I watch your podcast. I'm part of your giant podcast family out here, and
Let's go.
I appreciate what you do. I appreciate how you do it, and the guests that you have on. These are great conversations. They're important conversations. It's great ministry. So thank you, Mr. Red Letter Discipleship Guy. Appreciate it, man.
Thanks, Frank. Take care, bud. Well, I hope you're cheering Frank on and his church, New Church in Katy, Texas. God is doing so many great things there. And Lord, let it be that you would do more and more and more. I hope today's conversation brought a little bit more light of what it's like to be an SMP pastor, what it's like to hear other pastors talk about not sacrificing and calling and labeling them second rate, second tier, second mezzanine, whatever you might want to call it. And I hope we can reopen the conversation on, does an SMP pastor need provisional status for the rest of their life? That seems crazy to me. Let's think about church growth, and what if one of these churches grows, and how they can be able to oversee called workers rather, and how they can send students of their own through SMP, and how they can be a mentor. These are conversations we got to keep having. Thanks to today's sponsor, Hodos. You can go to Hodosway, HODOSWAY.com to learn more about this ministry for young adults, 18 to 29-year-olds in the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod. You can learn a little bit more about the Lutheran Young Adult Gathering of 2027, and you can learn about how you can be generous towards this cause at HODOSWAY.com. Next week, I am bringing on somebody that I am super fond of. I know him really well. He knows me really well. It is my dad, Mark Zender. Mark is the third of the Zender in the LCMS pastor, third generation. I'm fourth generation, but we talk about Dad. He started a ministry after retirement called Always Forward Ministries. And so we're going to talk pastoral succession, leadership transition, especially in the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod, why we need more pastors. It's going to be a deep episode on the state of pastors in the LCMS and how we can kind of pass that baton and get ready for the next generation. So you're not going to want to miss. I'm talking too fast. you're not gonna want to miss next week's episode. So make sure that you are subscribed or follow on whatever platform you listen or watch so it automatically comes to you. Hey, with all that being said, have a great week, and we'll see you back next week. God bless.